So it's a very special privilege that tonight's presentation is one of the first under the banner of JIUO's East Asian Languages and Literatures Department's Yoko McLean Lecture Series in Japanese Studies, named for our own late beloved Professor Yoko Matsuoka McLean, who first came to JIUO as an international student in 952 and stayed essentially for the rest of her life. We do not have enough time to honor Yoko's profound legacy to this university, community, and museum, but we at the JSMA are very proud that in her student days, Yoko worked as one of only 3 employees in this institution, along with a museum director and a custodian, in order to support her studies. After distinguishing herself during graduate school, Yoko married artist Robert McLean and went on to teach Japanese language and literature at UO for 30 years, becoming a world-renowned and yet eminently approachable professor who inspired great respect and affection for generations of students and colleagues. In addition to her very busy academic career, her partnership and successful printmaking supply business, and her dedication to home, family, and friends, Yoko maintained warm and enduring ties with this museum, where she had worked as a student, and to whom she bequeathed over 150 amazing 20th century Japanese prints, especially the fabulous 53 Stages of the Tokaido series by Sosaku Hanga artist Sekino Junichiro, who became a great friend of the McLean family, and whose works we continue to collect using funds donated in Yoko's memory. I have to hold back emotion when I recall how happy Yoko seemed as she bounded up to give us all hugs at the end of a day-long faculty-student colloquium, UO Lectures in Japanese Art, saying how much she enjoyed the presentations that everyone did in this very lecture hall in October 2011, less than 5 days before her passing. The topic of tonight's lecture seems especially fitting since in the early 1990s, Yoko McLean accompanied our former curator, Lawrence Fong, on a very special trip to Kyushu to courier this exquisite Japanese friendship doll to the city of Fukuoka, where they were met with great fanfare. Yoko wore her academic authority and her sterling literary pedigree lightly, but Larry reminisced how everyone they met in Japan went out of their way to assist them in deference to Yoko-san. One could push the comparison between Professor McLean and this sweet-faced ichimatsu ningyō doll as cultural ambassadors, but I don't think we need to do that. I think it's enough to respect each within their overlapping spheres, and to know how much Yoko would have enjoyed the opportunity to bask in the fascinating and exhaustive research that tonight's speaker will present. It is no exaggeration to say that Alan Scott Pate is the preeminent Western specialist in the field of Japanese dolls, having published 3 major books and any number of scholarly articles on the topic. Somehow, he morphed gracefully from a Harvard PhD in Korean history into the foremost scholar and dealer of traditional Japanese ningyō, which hold a far more important and culturally resonant place in Japan than the English word doll might suggest. Tonight, we have the very special pleasure of hearing Alan present his most ambitious research to date, a wide-ranging consideration of the detective work he's done in museums and archives across the US and overseas to document the complex and idealistic Japanese friendship doll program, which was brought into existence to combat anti-Japanese sentiment in the 1920s. This project was grounded in a particular time and place, and yet its broader cultural significance seems relevant and perhaps even more urgent today. As a specialist in Japanese art, I thought it might be worth learning a bit more about this topic. But after hearing Alan present an earlier stage of his research in Japanese at a friendship doll conference at Doshisha University in Kyoto, I asked him to come to Eugene to share his insights with all of you. Thankfully, he took me up on this invitation, and so please join me in welcoming Alan Scott Pate.
It's a really wonderful pleasure to be here tonight, but one serious correction in terms when you get into an academic environment and someone says you have a PhD from Harvard, you need to correct that because it was not a PhD. It was an MA, which in the tiers of things is much lower in the food chain. But this talk, in many respects, is 84 years in the making because it's been 84, 85 since the dolls came over. And much has happened in between. And so when Ann Rose asked me to come to speak here, there is so much to say, so much to talk about that it has to be parceled out a little bit. And so I'm going to be omitting some things because each of the 58 dolls are, in many respects, 58 individuals. They've had lives, they've had experiences, good and bad. Some are still with us, some are not. And to go through and chronicle each one, you'd need, a picnic lunch and a sleeping bag. So I won't go into that kind of detail, but I would like to sort of welcome you into a world that many people have forgotten, but that in its day, beginning in the 1920s, had a lot of public press. The New York Times wrote many articles about these dolls, and they came with great fanfare and then faded into somewhat of an oblivion, and now it's being resurrected. So this talks about history, talks about middle ground, and then also talks about the state of them today. But just to start moving, it starts on a fairly dark tone. Why the friendship doll exchange? And this all originated because of a vehement anti-Japanese movement centered in California largely, beginning in the early 1900s, but spilled over to the national stage in 1924 with the Immigration Act, which severely curtailed citizenship rights of Japanese, even the Japanese that had fought in the Great War. A lot of their rights were revoked. And in response to this, not a perceived, but an actual national, it seems like a national trend toward anti-Japanese elements, two individuals enter our picture, two seminal individuals. The gentleman on the right is Sidney Gulick. He was a missionary in Japan, fluent in Japanese, actually taught at Doshisha University, and he was greatly distressed at what he saw unfolding in the American stage. He wrote many articles, very, very active, very outspoken individual regarding the relations between Japan and the U.S., but in a non-governmental sense. He was very much, as a reverend, he was involved with the Presbyterian movement toward world peace. On the other side, we have Viscount Shibusawa Eiichi, and he, very successful Japanese businessman, part of the Japanese government early on in the Meiji era, and dedicated the majority of his life to establishing better relations between the U.S. And Japan. Made several trips to the U.S. as well, and he was sort of the Japanese counterpoint to Gulick in this movement. What was this movement? Well, the idea was that Gulick hit upon was, right, the adults are messing it up. The adults have gone down the wrong road. So, lost cause. We will now start with the next generation. We'll start with the children. And what better to reach children than to communicate through the universal language of dolls? So, through his organization, which was the World Committee on Friendship Among Children, he succeeded in garnering a nationwide movement, and they collected 12,739 dolls that were sent to Japan. Now, these were little dolls, like the one that's being held up there, sort of inexpensive department store types that local communities would dress. The YWCAs, the Sunday schools would dress the dolls. They were all gathered together and sent over to Japan. And this is my current favorite picture because I think it captures the spirit of enthusiasm with which these dolls were received. The idea was for the dolls to arrive in time for the annual Hina Matsuri, so that they could be included in that doll-centered festival, because Gulick knew that far more than in Western American culture, dolls, or ningyō, played a significant cultural role, and if you sort of plucked that particular string, it would reverberate much further than if you sent them, I don't know, a football, things like that. So the dolls, unfortunately, the vast majority arrived in time for the Hina Matsuri, but the select group of 48 dolls representing the 48 states, and this doll, Miss America, their ship was delayed at sea, and so they had sort of a post-Hina celebration, but had an audience with the emperor himself, the empress, and the little Princess Teruko, received these dolls and actually had a palace built for them in the museum in Ueno. And the 48 dolls and Miss America and a few Japanese companion dolls thrown in were displayed in the museum in Ueno. And this was a huge success. Movies were made of it. The press just went gaga over the entire operation. Reports back came to the U.S. via publications such as Everyland, where they chronicled each step of the process, from when the dolls were first being collected to how they were received in Japan. And that way, Americans were, kept apprised. But what also happened was the idea was to forge bonds, individual bonds between children, not some esoteric, abstract, nation-to-nation dialogue, but child to child. I know you, you know me. We're not that different, so ultimately we know each other and we'll live in peace. So soon after, photographs started coming back from Japanese children to the American children, addressed to the schools, addressed to the Sunday schools, addressed sometimes to the individuals themselves that sent the dolls. And the letters are wonderful. This one was actually sent to a Sunday school in Kentucky. And I think that this is just wonderful for its sentiment, but also its verbiage. When we think of America, we remember at once the dear friends who sent us the lovely doll. Our dear friends in the country of far distance. I love that. Our dear friends in the country of far distance, shall we be still more friendly forever? A poignant question when you think about the history that followed. Immediately, the Japanese felt a sense to respond. Not on a government level, not on a national level, not on a huge level, but individuals. This is a young group of women at the Red Cross, Japanese Red Cross in Osaka, gathering together dolls that were called kokka ningyō. And their idea was to send 10 dolls to 10 countries to promote this thing. So Gulick's idea sort of had sort of an echoing and rippling effect. And so these dolls were sent out. This particular group is being prepared to be sent to America. We don't know what happened to them. But other things, school kids gathered seeds, flower seeds, and they sent friendship seed packets to children of America so that you plant the seed, and when it grows and blooms, you think of us. It got a little kind of crazy because they also sent friendship trout. The idea was that the ayu is a kind of a fish that's prized, and there was an idea to introduce Japanese ayu into American streams and whatnot, and so they were called the friendship trout movement, which I won't go any further than that. But the formal response that we're here to talk about today was largely coordinated through the Department of Education. So it immediately had a governmental patina to it. Shiba Sawaichi was an underwriter. He was a supporter, but he was not a minister. He wasn't in a ministerial position. But the Department of Education took this idea and really ran with it. And they decided to commission 58 dolls. And they got the best artisans in the land, ningyō artisans in the land, to create these dolls. And people frequently ask, well, why 58? We only had 48 states, so why are they sending us 58 dolls? That's because it's not based on us. It's based on the Japanese topography of the time. So you have Miss Dainihon representing the imperial family and all of Japan symbolically. You have the 6 principal cities. You have the 4 overseas territorial holdings, because you have to remember that in the 20s, Japan was Manchuria, Sakhalin Island, Taiwan, and Korea. So dolls representing those territories, colonies, were sent as well. And then if you do your math, we have 47 prefectures that round the whole thing out. So those are our 58. And so this shows Koryusai, one of the artists that we'll talk about, and actually the artist that made Miss Fukuoka there. And actually her head is there somewhere. I don't know which head is hers, but that's her in we'll call it an embryonic state. So once the dolls were made, there was, there was a 2-tier process. Japanese doll making is a centuries-old process, a well-established industry with its politics, with its various, elements, factions. And so you have basically the Kyoto group, which was represented by Maruhei Okiheizo, an atelier that was responsible for supplying dolls to the imperial family, very well respected. And on the Tokyo side, you had Yoshitoku, very, very popular, very well established. And so these 2 doll-making ateliers were what the Department of Education went to and said, we need these dolls. The Kyoto firm was responsible for Miss Dainihon and the 6 city dolls, and Yoshitoku took care of all of the rest. So we're going to talk about Yoshitoku for right now. Yoshitoku didn't say, you make 1 doll, you make 1 doll, you make 1 doll. What they decided to do was to put it out to all the makers so they could contribute, and the best would be selected. So this represents all the dolls that were submitted. There are about 100 of them that were submitted all total. And out of those, the dolls to represent the 4 overseas territorial holdings and the prefectures were selected. So this is actually the selection process going underway. And these were the artists which were honored by having their dolls selected. So there are 9 artists. Unfortunately, we know their artistic names, but we don't know all of their personal names yet. There's sort of an odd idea that 1927 is not that long ago, but yet penetrating the world of artisans is not that easy. And so we have their artistic names, but we don't have the personal names for all of them. But the 3 that we'll focus on today is, is this gentleman here, the only one in Western suit, and that's Koryusai, the artist that made Miss Fukuoka. And then we have Hirata Goyo, who went on to become very celebrated and founder of the contemporary art doll movement. And then Iwamura Shokensai, who was, those three together made the most of the dolls. Their product comprised the greatest proportion. And the only ones we had the personal names for. So, this is a image of Goyo holding one of his dolls after the product. It's hard for us to imagine how the creation of dolls could generate excitement, how the manufacture of anything that we consider so much a plaything is so insignificant could have national ramifications or launch careers. And this was actually a huge springboard for a completely different way that the Japanese themselves viewed ningyō. And it was the beginning of the modern art doll movement, which continues to be very robust and exciting today. And Goyo was its primary, champion. He's the only one who actually signed his dolls on the head, literally like an artist would sign his dolls, as a statement that, no, I'm not an artist, and I am an artist. So the dolls then were, once the forms were decided on, then the dolls were given over to Endo Hatsuko, who owned a salon on the Ginza. She would dress the imperial family. Still, that salon is the go-to place for anyone to get their hair done and to have weddings planned. And so this is her dressing the dolls in her studio there on the Ginza in Tokyo. But you can also see that she also dressed the Kyoto-made dolls, because this is Miss Dai Nihon right there, and you have a doll in a box, not yet coming out. The kimono themselves were manufactured through Takashimaya department store. They were the ones that were responsible for manufacturing the kimono and overseeing the production of the accessories, which we'll talk about later. So that's the Tokyo side. Kyoto, as we get through this, or we look into them, these dolls are structurally quite different. They're all of wood, solid wood. Joinery is different. Facial physiognomy is different. The hand shape holds a fan, so the fingers, the thumb and the forefinger are touching. And so it's a very different doll. And because of that construction technique, the solid wooden element, they have fared the worst. They're not doing so well. Over time, environment and whatnot has taken their toll, and so we have very few of them actually that have come down to us. But this is Miss Tokyo, this is Miss Kobe, which at that point they pronounced Kaobe, not Kobe, but Kaobe. And that's Miss Osaka, representing the city of Osaka. And so, we sent over 12,739 numerically significant dolls, but they were tiny. And the Japanese sent back 58 children. I mean, just for clarity, that's a live person on the left. All right? It's an actual little girl. And this was actually, for a long time, this photograph was thought to have been taken in Japan, but this is actually, we found out just recently, this was taken in San Francisco. Another image of the shot shows a young American girl off to the right. So the dolls are made, and I'm just accelerating this a little bit. The dolls are made, but they represent places. They don't represent just Japan. They represent the prefectures. They represent the towns. So once they're made, they are then sent out to the various localities so that the children of those localities can bestow gifts upon them, say their goodbyes, and have a sobetsukai, a ceremony for saying farewell. And so this is the sobetsukai in Kyoto. And so that's Miss Kyoto there in the middle. And I love the energy that is expressed in a lot of these sobetsukai photographs with the children. It's almost like that first photograph I showed with them waving the flags. I mean, here they're saying goodbye to Miss Kyoto Fu, not the city of Kyoto, but the environs around Kyoto. And it's like, manzai, manzai. And there's just such enthusiasm as they're sending off their personal envoy, their personal doll, to go back to the United States. This is Miss Ishikawa, who I was talking to with someone earlier. This is her sobetsukai. Complicated story there. We'll do that another time. And then once they went around and did their farewell ceremonies, a select group was brought back to Tokyo for the big formal national farewell ceremony presided over by the Department of Education. Shibasao Eiichi, the American ambassador, was there. A very Tony event. About 12 dolls were displayed at that. The rest were being packed, getting on the ship, ready to go to America. And they're announced. At this point, the Americans know the dolls are coming. They're coming. The facts are frequently misstated. The numbers are wrong. The various details are wrong in the American press, no different than today. We knew they were coming, but we didn't know what was coming. And I think this is going to be telling. So they all boarded the Tenyu Maru. and then they were sailed to San Francisco. Now you have to remember that San Francisco was the epicenter of the anti-Japanese movement. And so the San Francisco press really took delight in sort of, I think, tweaking the arrival, tweaking the message. So for example, Japanese invasion was not likely what Gulick had in mind or Shibusawa Eiichi had in mind when he sent these dolls. The very next day, they had an entire front page headline talking about a secret treaty that existed between Mexico and Japan for an invasion of the United States via Mexico. Right? The day after the friendship dolls arrived, they blasted this headline. And so the politics of the day, these little dolls are going into battle. They're not going on a joyride. They have to fight a lot of political forces, social forces, biases once they got here. And it was kind of a harrowing journey. Also, if you read the caption at the bottom, it says, "This is Miss Yokohama." Ignore that. It's not Miss Yokohama. So the dolls arrive in San Francisco, and they're displayed, all 58 in all their glory, at the Kimon Gakuen, which is a cultural center, Japanese school that is still extant today. The Kimon Gakuen, you can go and visit this very stage today in San Francisco. And this is the only photograph that exists of all 58 dolls together. At no point in Japan were they assembled as a group in toto and photographed. So this is a very, 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 how can I emphasize that? It's really important. And it's used to help identify the dolls and straighten out some Gordian knots that we're dealing with. But that's a sepia tone photograph. Imagine coming in there and being confronted with the vibrancy of the silks, the reds, the greens with the embroidery, the design elements. I mean, 58 of these little children standing on a stage is a choral of some impact. And the designs are wonderful, and it gives you an idea of the detail and the exquisiteness of what came back to us. These were not department store little knockoffs. These were exquisitely custom rendered dolls, plus the accoutrements, the accessories that went along with them. The obi, the brocades, just really stunning. And so what I've been doing is I travel around, I have a little camera, and I take pictures of all the dolls that I get to meet. And so these, I have now succeeded in visiting all that are still extant. So the dolls that are colorized are the dolls that we still have. Black and white dolls indicate dolls that are, well, they've gone on a little walkabout somewhere, and we're not sure exactly where they are. But it helps to give an idea of when you walked into the Kimon Gakuen in November of 1927, what you were presented with. This splendoriferous color burst that, you know, with the shock of the black and the white faces contrasted with this, I think it must have been kind of a, you know, air gulp inducing kind of moment. So the dolls quickly toured the Bay Area. Again, not the most welcoming environment in San Francisco. And then a select group headed down south to Los Angeles area. Oddly enough, they were not displayed in Los Angeles. That honor went to Riverside. And you may think, well, that's a really odd choice. But Riverside is home to the Mission Inn, which is a very famous hotel. Also, it was home to Frank Miller, who was arguably one of the more important non-governmental players in Japanese American relations. And he owned the inn, so the dolls came to him with two little escapees going to Pasadena. So while this group is down south, the rest of them are on a boat. They're heading around through the Panama Canal, and they're all going to have a happy reunion back in New York City. But in the meantime, this select group heads cross country. They stop by train, stop in Denver, and stop in Chicago. And this is the first time Gulick is seeing the dolls. He was not able to get to San Francisco for the arrival, so this photograph is Gulick looking at Miss Yokohama. This is the real Miss Yokohama for the first time. And I think he's going, oh my goodness, how are we going to deal with all these? Because the number of crates required to transport all 58 dolls and their accessories was a logistical challenge. It was a problem. So this select group of dolls goes to Washington, D.C., where they're received at the National Theater. This is at the home of the Japanese ambassador, Matsudaira. That's Madame Matsudaira up there on the left with Gulick, and Rikichi Sakaya, who was the representative from the Department of Education, who was basically the uncle that traveled around with the dolls until he decided he wanted to go to Europe, and he left them all behind. So the dolls came, not just the dolls. As you'll see here, they came with other things. They came with a ship ticket, right? Individualized ship ticket. They also came with a passport. an individualized passport. They came with an extensive set of lacquer accessories, some with kimono bedding, not full scale for the doll, but token symbolic, as you see here. And beautiful work, very, very well wrought. All of the accessories having an individualized crest. They also came with tea sets, both matcha Japanese style as well as sencha Chinese style. Altogether, a trousseau, full trousseau, it's about 60 pieces. And a registrar for a museum, it's a nightmare because there's a little tiny chopstick, there's a little fan, there's a little trivet. And it's, especially when you think of museum systems in the 20s, not computerized, handwritten little note cards, and they're having to keep track of all these things. And some were successful and some less so. So they have met back in New York, and so now it's time for them to go to work. Joyride's over. It is time to meet their public, which are the American children, far and wide. Miss Japan is immediately placed in the Smithsonian, where she's very well enshrined with all of her accessories and a companion doll. And she remains there today, arguably the most intact, well-preserved of the group of 58. The rest were outfitted with this cute little trunk, made in New York, and the doll and a stand fits in this, and this was their traveling compartment. And so the dolls moved around the country, being stored in these wonderful little trunks. Each one bore a number, but no one bothered to keep track of the numbers, and so it was a well-intentioned system that failed because they soon lost track of where the dolls were. They started off in large groups, 9, 12, to sort of get them to various regions, and from there they began to splinter out and spread out in smaller and smaller groups. Newspaper coverage was was frequently there, sometimes positive, sometimes it was just a little thing, Jap doll in town. Done. That was it. That was the only coverage. But this, like the Idaho Statesman, a wonderful article that really captured the spirit of what they were trying to do. The dolls frequently were displayed in department stores downtown as part of their thing, which was wonderful in some respects because it got the people to see, but department stores' windows in the 20s, in the sun, in the summer, not so good for the dolls. And so there's like a cumulative impact as these dolls begin to travel around that we'll address in a bit. There were two very big meetings. In Minneapolis, a group of 12 were together, and then also the World Sunday School Convention, the 10th Annual Sunday School Convention that took place in Los Angeles, also brought 8 dolls together and is very, very important because it ties directly into the fate of Miss Fukuoka. This was held in July, and right in the middle of July, that's when the dolls are beginning to find their homes. That's when they're being placed in their various museums and final locations, libraries, cultural institutions. Sometimes the photography and the documentation is a little cheesy, seeming to denigrate what this whole is about, but every now and then you find coverage that is just so wonderful and so to the point. This was in Niagara Falls, New York, in April of 1928. And so this is a wonderful story. The photographer for this was Theodore Kondo. Kondo was born in Japan in the 1890s, immigrated to the United States, married an American woman in 1917, and had a daughter. He also became a photographer. And this, sort of counterintuitively, is his daughter. This blonde-haired girl wearing the kimono on the left is his daughter, Ruth Ardell Kondo. On the right is Lois Mackay. Well, actually, it's Mackay. She's Scottish, and she corrected me. She is still alive today and doing very, very well, and remembers the entire event. She remembers it was a rainy day. She remembers what she was wearing. She remembers that she was given this little speech, to read. She was a little bit nervous, those kinds of things. But one of the perplexing reasons was, why was she picked? Everyone has asked her, why was she picked? And we figured out that was because in 1927, she had perfect Sunday school attendance for the entire year, right? She got a Bible indicating that she had perfect attendance in 1927, and this entire stop in Niagara Falls was organized by the local Presbyterian church, of which she was the star Sunday school pupil. Ruth Ardell Kondo went to a different school, and so they actually had never met before this day. They are meeting for the first time practically in this photograph, and sadly enough, they didn't meet again. Lives took them in different directions. Although Theodore Kondo was the family photographer for Lois Nicholson's family at that point. They have several photographs by Kondo. He was the family photographer in downtown Niagara. I'm sure he did honeymooning couples as well. And so this is Miss Kyoto Fu, who we saw the Manzai photo. This is her in America. And Miss Iwate. Miss Kyoto Fu lives in Boston, and Miss Iwate lives in Birmingham, Alabama. And that's and Lois, in case you're wondering, lives in Rancho Bernardo, Southern California. So let's talk about Oregon, because these dolls are touring, and they came to Oregon. So Miss Taiwan, the doll representing Taiwan, went to Bend, Oregon in April of 1927. Very well feted. Japanese from all in that area came in, were brought in. No photographs exist of that particular ceremony. This is Miss Taiwan later arriving in Los Angeles, where she is now at the Natural History Museum. But that's Miss Taiwan. So the West Coast, I don't know how you describe it in the state. This side of the mountains, is there the corridor? I don't know what you call it. It's, Portland, Salem, Albany, Corvallis. Eugene were treated to a visit of 3 dolls. You have Miss Fukui here, and then we have some identity issues, but Miss Wakayama and Miss Nara. So these 3 dolls traveled in a group, and they arrived in Portland. They were celebrating Portland on April 27th, 1928. And this is the daughter, the one on the left is the daughter of what was then the Japanese consul in Portland. And his name is escaping me completely. It's K. But anyway, this is his daughter, and that's Miss Fukui. And so a lot of press for the Portland event. And from there, they came to this campus. 2 of the dolls came to this campus, and they kind of treated it a little, oddly. You have this big event, and they come up with a limerick. How do you do, dear college folk? How do you do, we say? How would you like to clip your class and play with us today? I mean, not exactly the sentiment that I think. But from here, they were displayed downtown in a department store. You might remember or recognize this as the McMorran and Dearborn. It's the Tiffany building, but it was a department store in those days, and they were displayed in the window. But the big event in downtown Portland in downtown Eugene was a parade. They closed school Friday, closed school completely. All the kids came down. The dolls were paraded through town, and 1,000 children were organized for a chorus of singing "America the Beautiful" in honor of international friendship. So certain of the more, and it was very much combined with a Bible study. You have to imagine the World Committee on Friendship Among Children was a Presbyterian organization, and churches were very, very evolved. So, for example, the event that was so eloquently commemorated in the Limerick on campus was held at the YWCA bungalow, because at that point, evidently, they didn't have a building, and in the press of the day, it's alternatively described as a hut or a bungalow. Evidently, it was petite. But this was a very, very big event, and I was very happy to see op-ed pieces and letters that showed up in the paper afterward. Evidently, Mary Jordan ran a weekly column in the Eugene paper about friendship and things like that, and so she took the opportunity to comment on the friendship dolls, and I thought, because sometimes the dolls came and they went and it was dead. For example, in Niagara Falls, Lois Nicholson said that there was no programming in school on the following Monday. No mention of the dolls ever again. And so it came and it went. But in some communities, they seem to get the spirit and to help perpetuate it. So at this point, the dolls are tired. They have been traveling. They've been in that little trunk, out of the little trunk, back in the little trunk, out of the little trunk. And you also have to think about logistics of travel in America in 1928. There was no cross-country highway. Trains were not owned by one company. It was a disparate sort of connectivity between different companies, and the logistics of getting from A to B, very, very complex. And these poor little guys in their trunks traveling in the summer, being displayed in department store windows, they were fatigued. And so it was decided that they needed to find a permanent home. Basta, enough, they need to rest. And so they started coming into their institutions. This is Miss Ibaragi at the museum in Wisconsin, Milwaukee. She a little greedy because she ended up with duplicates of various sets. Bad girl. This is Ms. Nagano, who was feted by a very special production of Miss Chichipu, which was sort of like a Ersatz Gilbert and Sullivan made-up-on-the-spot drama to feature this lovely doll with it's supposed to be Japanese, but you have sort of bizarre Fu Manchu elements going on. Very much a sense of Orientalism at the time, what their conception was. It was a very abstract thought of what was Japanese at all. And there she is. I think she's thinking, oh. So some were big celebrations. This is the arrival ceremony for Miss Fukui at the state capitol in Utah. That's Governor Dern in the middle, his daughter Nancy on the right. And this is Akiko, who was selected out of the Japanese American community for her correct comportment. And she's honored in the local press quite frequently because she did things right, this girl did. So she was elected. And I actually found the reason it's grainy is this is actually a video. I found a film from 1928 of their arrival ceremony. It's all grainy and jerky, very, period of them coming out. And there's folk dances and various things going on in the background. Wonderful, wonderful story, but that's the arrival ceremony. Very official. And this is Miss Shimane at the Children's Museum. Each museum had an obligation. They would say, yes, I want the doll. Send the doll to us. In exchange, as part of the deal, they had to take a photograph of the doll in its new home, and they had to have the governor of that state or the mayor of that city send a letter to the reciprocal. So Ms. Shimane, for Shimane-ken, the governor of Shimane-ken should have gotten a letter from the governor of Indianapolis, or governor of Indiana, excuse me. And so they would show her institute and to sort of a formal acknowledgement. And they were a stickler that this gets done. I have found so many letters of the World Friendship Community harassing institutions years later, saying, in our files, we do not find your letter. Do it. And so I don't think anyone got off the hook. So there would have been a letter from here as well, but it hasn't surfaced yet. Some went to some quasi-private institutions. This is kind of exciting. You don't see much in this photo, but this is Miss Kobe. She went missing for a long time, and there was no photograph, no document at all of where she was. And it turns out that she was in the private museum of Arthur Garfield Learned, who was an artist, sort of bon vivant. Perhaps his greatest fame came through his granddaughter, who was Michael Learned, an actress on the TV program The Waltons. And so no photographs existed in the US. However, very obedient Garfield Learned was. He sent a letter to the mayor of Kobe saying this is where the doll is. And so in Kobe newspapers, this was completely published, announcing where their doll had arrived. So this is an extract from the Kobe newspaper. So our dolls have arrived, and they're all in their glory. This is Miss Fukushima, now in Kansas City, originally sent to Dallas. Miss Osaka Fu by Hirata Goyo, and she is in Ohio. Miss Kochi, and she is in Pittsburgh at the Natural History Museum there. And you can see that there's, like, for example, personalized elements. Sometimes the children or the prefectures would send meibutsu, products that were specific to their. So no trousseau, no two trousseaus are identical because there's all these other elements that were added to it. And also, you can get excited about, or I get excited about the history and whatnot, but there's a lot of artistry there that you have to be careful not to gloss over because these dolls were made by really good makers. And so when you look at the individual expressions, they're not mass-produced, each one hand-done. The surface, people frequently ask, what's that surface? It looks like porcelain. It's a material called gofun, which is a crushed oyster shell and animal glue that can be modeled, sculpted, but it also can have like a porcelainous sheen to it, but also it's water soluble, so if you've wiped out, whatever was there. But the gofun is a wonderful material, but also the bane of people trying to care for. So this is Miss Mie. She's just, I love her. Miss Kagawa in North Carolina. Oh, Miss Mie is in Lincoln, Nebraska. Kagawa in Raleigh, North Carolina. Miss Wakayama by Goyo in Nevada. Next to her is a wonderfully preserved two-headed calf. If you go down to the museum in Reno, it's Miss Wakayama and a two-headed calf. Go team. But the detailing, the palms of the hand, there's just so much artistry that goes into them that, really, you could go by in a rush, but when you stop and look, the detailing is absolutely crazy. Okay, abrupt change. The dolls have arrived, they're in their institutions. All is well for some of them, most of them, until obviously the big, elephant in the room, the war. how did the friendship dolls on both sides survive this sort of, well, let's call it a test of friendship. If we focus on the Japanese side first, very quickly after the war began, you started seeing op-ed pieces or editorials or articles talking about the friendship dolls. And you think, well, you're in a war and you're going to bother with dolls? I mean, but it shows that these actually had resonance. These dolls representing America's friendship was in all the schools. The children were seeing them every day, and the Ministry of Education said that we really need to address this problem. What was the way to address it? So in one case, they sent out a survey to the children, part of the sort of the idea of helping to rewire the way they thought about it. What should we do about these enemy dolls amongst us? So they had a survey. What would you do with it? And some say burn them. Some say, punish them, send them out, send them home, send them adrift, all these various things. But ultimately what happened was the Ministry of Education said it is inappropriate for these dolls to be in schools, and in essence, I wouldn't mind it if they were all burned. So this has come down in modern lore as it was an imperial decree to destroy all the dolls. No, it was a comment made by the Minister of Education, which was taken very seriously in wartime. So you have mass burnings of the dolls, all piled together in a pyre, all Americana, Cupid dolls went with it, flags, everything was burned. And so out of our 12,739 dolls, we now have 362, right? But also you have to imagine that because of the politics of the time and the tension and the idea of basically disobeying what was in essence a mandate, all these people literally were risking their lives of being considered traitors to the country by saving a doll. So those 363s actually represent heroic gestures on the part of individuals in various communities to save the dolls. And so the only dolls that we have today are those that were rescued, in a sense, hidden away in storage cupboards at great risk. So what happened to the dolls in America? Well, the only doll that we have documented as being displayed continually throughout the war is Miss Kagawa in Raleigh, North Carolina. They kept her in her case, but they turned her face around and put it in the corner, right? And there was a note saying, in essence, things aren't going well right now, folks, and I'll turn around when it's all better. I'm paraphrasing. There was actually a beautiful quote below it, but she stayed on display the entire time, actually encouraging people to talk about it. I mean, we have this friendship, and now we have this, and so she's the only one. The vast majority were forgotten. Taken off of display, put in storage, forgotten, and when they resurfaced, when this interest began again in the 70s and early 80s, and the call was put out to find these dolls. This is Miss Ishikawa and Helena. I mean, it looks sort of like a back alley harlot that's had a kind of a rough night. Not exactly again the image that you want. So. But they didn't. No one knew what to care. No one knew what to do with an obi or a kimono or the hair or that kind of thing. But that they survived it all is frankly a miracle. But work is going now to sort of bring them back to their glory, and some of them were quite sad. This is Miss Aomori, a very sad Miss Aomori. But we took her back, and this is the current generation of Toko, Shokensai Toko. And he lovingly cared for her, and that's her today. She's back to, from a pure, let's preserve the original Gofun approach, maybe not so good. Museums may go, but she's ready for duty, sir. She's back in action. So, in '83, basically, the movement began to relocate all of the dolls. It was a very aggressive thing. Various companies in Japan were on board. And they sent out survey letters to all the institutions that originally received the dolls. Do you have the doll? Do you have the condition? Because the idea was to bring them all back to Japan for a happy reunion, right? This was in '83. They had '88 planned for a happy reunion. The problem was that many of the institutions that got the letter said, I've never heard of a friendship doll. I have no idea what they're talking about, even if they had it. So it took a while, and things are still going on. So this, for example, this is Miss Kumamoto. And she was sent to New Orleans. Gone. No idea. Just, we have a stand. We have her stand to know that she was there. No documents, nothing. I mentioned Frank Miller, his Riverside, the Mission Inn in Riverside. This is Miss Chiba. And Don't know. The museum had a big auction in '57, but no mention of her. There's all sorts of theories. There's people out there researching, but gone. Some of the museums were really quite significant. This is the Commercial Museum in Philadelphia, which was enormous and wonderful. Their goal was to collect all the materials from the various world fairs and display them so that people could sort of learn about culture through artifacts. And they had Miss Saga and missing. Our beloved Miss Fukui, who actually was here in town. This is the doll that was presented earlier. She's also gone. One of the dolls went to Gulfport, Mississippi, Miss Ehime. And she was in the Carnegie Library. Beautiful stone building, very, very sturdy. In '67, she was moved to the brand new public library right on the beach with glass windows. Right? 1968, Hurricane Camille comes in and decides to take, well, lots of things, but Miss Ehime with her. So the children of Ehime, when they heard about this, were distraught. They decided formally to send a new Miss Ehime. So they made a new one, same scale. Artistically, it's a little bit questionable to me, with the new crest for Ehime-ken right there on the shoulder. Installed, Katrina comes through. That doll also gets sucked out into the sea, gone. So they're not sending any more dolls to Gulfport, Mississippi. It's just not going to happen. Happier story, Miss Toyama, installed at the Speed Museum in Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky. There was a big flood in '37. I mean, the Ohio River went bananas, flooded the entire town, and they thought that they had lost Miss Toyama. Decades go by. They don't have Miss Toyama. A new curator assistant comes in who had spent some time with Miss Shimane in Indianapolis, is going through the stacks and happens to see this. Opens it, and there she is. She was there the entire time. So Miss Toyama is now back with us after probably a little TLC and maybe some super glue, and back and beautiful in business. And this is, these missing stories have inspired a lot of people to go digging. So this is Yutaka Ledbetter, and she lives in Riverside, and so she's been searching for Miss Chiba for well, decades now and has no luck. But it seems to inspire a lot of passion and a lot of love, and it's a wonderful story. But there's hope. Dolls percolate up to the surface every now and then. This doll showed up at auction. This is by Goyo, and this is how she was. That was actually a French hair wig, not native to her at all, that someone had slapped on. And so this is her. You know, it's sad. But anyway, took her back to Japan, and this is how she is now. So back and well appointed for her thing. Another story. I'm looking at my time here. There was a children's book written called The Friendship Doll, and it's fiction. It talks about the Friendship Doll story, but don't read it as historical fact because there's so much misinformation. I pulled my hair out reading it. But it talks about the story and it inspired people. A librarian in Minneapolis read it and was just really moved by the fact that the doll representing Miss Miyazaki was sent to Minneapolis, and it's been missing for many, many, many years. And she read this story, and she's like, I wonder where Miss Miyazaki is. So in the library computer system, she types in Miss Miyazaki, and boom, she gets a hit. All right, so the problem was that the doll wasn't supposed to be in the library. The doll was supposed to be in the art museum. And I had gone to that very library, digging into their newspaper archives, never thinking, oh, by the way, in your stacks, do you happen to have the Friendship Doll that I'm looking for? So they called me, I went out, and absolutely wonderful. We're all reunited. The fact that she hasn't been displayed forever means that her kimono is in beautiful shape. Just the colors are still vibrant. It's absolutely wonderful. And I said, well, you know, you have the doll. What about her accessories? And they said, what accessories? What do you mean? I said, well, they came with accessories. They go, oh, wait a minute. And so they go into their children's room, and in the display cabinet of the children's room are all of Miss Miyazaki's accessories. All right, so it's hidden in plain sight. People just didn't know where to look, what question to ask, or when you see it, how to react. So now, okay, everyone needs to take a deep breath because this is a little complicated. All right, you think, how complicated could it be? We're talking about a doll. Okay, here we go. All right, we have a stand that says Miss Miyazaki, and we have lacquer crests with a very distinctive crest, lacquer elements with a very distinctive crest. So in our system, The dolls came, and they had their kimono. And the kimono, it's a monsuki, so it has 5 crests, very distinctive to that doll, very particular to that doll. And they are matched with accessories that bear the exact same crest. They came with a stand that had their name in English and in Japanese. They came with a passport and a ship ticket with their name. So we have so many ways of identifying the dolls. But when the dolls arrived, they quickly took out the ship tickets and the passports and put them aside for safekeeping, right? The accessories can't fit into that little trunk, so they are stored separately. The dolls have to come off the stands and then be displayed and put back. No one remembered which doll went on which stand, so they just began to be haphazardly put together. So we start having questions. The lacquer accessories for each doll was basically stored in New York, right? And at a warehouse there, and they, the Morimura brothers, they knew what they were doing. They had an inventory system, and each box had the name of the crest that went with the dolls. So they had a master list, so the doll comes to Eugene. They say, look on the stand. What stand do you have? Well, we have Miss Fukuoka. So they're going to send out the accessory for Miss Fukuoka because the lacquer could not travel with all the dolls because it would have been just destroyed. So we have our Miss Miyazaki, and we have this beautiful, beautiful kimono, and we have the crest. So we have the crest, and we have the lacquer accessory. So we have an identity problem. We have a confused identity. So we know right away we're not dealing with Miss Miyazaki. So the crest for Miss Miyazaki is this. It should be this crest. So now we need to find the doll that has that crest. And so I dug into my data bank, and it shows up here with the doll that's in Spokane, Washington, Miss Tokushima. So she has the correct crest. So it's a question of putting together the parts. The doll has to match the accessories, and so we have identities that need to be fleshed out. So we go back to our crest for the Miss Miyazaki, and I said, well, you know, that doll has to exist somewhere. Where have I seen that crest before? And that actually is on our beautiful Miss Mie in Lincoln, Nebraska that we visited earlier. But then, of course, Miss Mie's accessories aren't correct. So there's this chain of events that once you start peeling back that layer, either you have to decide to go for it or say, I'd rather not know, right? Unfortunately, I like to peek. So I've come up with this chart. And this is to help identify, in a world that was all good, every single crest would match every other crest. But as you can see, that does not happen. And this is not a complete thing because this also includes some of the dolls that are missing, and there's some speculation involved. So it's a wonderful world. It's a wonderful world. So let's now talk about our doll, Miss Fukuoka, who is here in Eugene. And when did she arrive? Actually, so she's by Koryusai, and just a really beautiful, beautiful example. And this helps you see her a little bit better than you might be able to look at her on the table. Just wonderful expression, the gofun, and in beautiful condition. And again, a great deal of artistry. And then this wonderful, wonderful phoenix on her kimono. So until today, we did not know when she came to campus. And today I found out when she came to campus. She arrived in January 25th, 1929. She had been down at the World Sunday School Convention with all those kids in LA, and she stayed there for a little too long, and so she arrives. All the dolls that were at the Sunday School Convention were late distributed, so the doll arrived here today. But what I find very, very interesting in this article is that she was assigned to the Murray Warner Oriental Art Museum, is how it's listed in the documents. And so because of Gertrude Bass Warner's intense activity with international peace and friendship, there has been a logical assumption that she was the one that spearheaded the doll coming. In point of fact, she had nothing to do with it. It was Professor of Education Harold S. Tuttle who was responsible for bringing the doll here. And when you go through the newspaper articles of the day, he is everywhere, a very active proponent in world peace on a local level. And so evidently, all the correspondent, from now on, we need to look through Tuttle's papers, not through Gertrude Bass Warner's papers. But here she has arrived. And what's interesting, it's a very, very interesting time on campus in the winter and spring of 29. It's very different from that sort of light, limericky, glad you came, I want to cut class with you kind of thing that happened before. They have a international week coming up where they're bringing in speakers from all over the world to talk about really core world problems. The Kellogg Peace Treaty is being negotiated, and there's a lot of coverage in the press. There's a lot of activity in student unions and whatnot. And So when she arrives, you have this sort of percolating activity on an international thing that was very different from when the dolls came through the previous spring. At the museum, you had the Sung paintings going on, you had an exhibition of Helen Hyde, but as always, there's this focus on the idea that the art should engender knowledge, engender goodwill. So the mission of the museum very much dovetailed with the mission of the dolls. So the placement of a doll here, whether it came from Gertrude Bass Warner or whether it came through Dr. Tuttle, was a very, very good placement. It all depends upon how it gets used, right? So these were the exhibitions that were going on right when the friendship doll arrived. But also this dude was on campus, right? A graduate from Waseda University came here to study sociology. Japanese, spoke very, very little English, but he was really impassioned by coming here, and he took this campus by storm. There was already a Japanese community here, students, but he started Japanese language classes. He brought in, from the consulate in Portland, he brought in 250 slides depicting Japan. He also got the name of every single male and female student on campus and sent it to Waseda University, where they were matched up with male and female students at Waseda. So girls with boys, boys with girls, who made gifts to send back to the students. So it's sort of like a mini friendship doll project. But, you know, we have some disconnect. Some of the, I had to include this because I think this is a very interesting quote. You have this young Japanese guy who's really going for it. He's really trying to sort of change things. And Mrs. Lewis Beeson was on faculty at that time and served as his translator. And in an op-ed piece after Otsuka-san had talked about all these great visions, this was her comment, that he's deluded, that American students have absolutely no interest in international relations, and that it's a fool's errand kind of thing. This was in the paper. So, but you have this great events happening that the doll was included in, and I guess that's what I'm getting at. The doll didn't arrive and just go into a cabinet. The doll came, and the doll was included in these international forums and was exposed. This gentleman came to town, Hidemichi Aragaki. He was actually on the speaker circuit for a very long time. This photo is from 1933, after the Manchurian element sort of came to the fore. But he was on campus, had tea with the doll, and was very... Teas, I mean, we laugh about teas. They were doing teas for everything. I mean, it was, the women had teas for all the events. You have this intense international conference, and we'll have a tea about it. So they were included in these celebrations. So she came to campus and she was used. She fulfilled her mandate. It was wonderful. But then, as Ann Rose was talking about, she went back to Japan for some long overdue love and care and returned to Fukuoka. And she was there for a while. She stayed at the Yokohama Museum until just recently when she came back. And it's very rare that you actually see what's underneath all the kimono. And so this is her being redressed by Aoki-san from Yoshitoku. So that's the signature that exists on the back of all the dolls, letting us know who made the doll. Koryusai. This is her kombi, her one-piece underwear combination that the Japanese made specifically for the friendship dolls because they knew that Americans were going to peek under the kimono and they didn't want the dolls to be embarrassed. Right? Kombi didn't exist as a doll accoutrement until the friendship dolls. And then after that, everyone had to have kombi and also tabi. Ichimatsu did not wear tabi until 1927. And this was because they were going abroad and they needed to be well, you know. So this is her laid out in her kombi. The nagajuban that goes on underneath the kimono. And then it was a very long process tying the obi, sort of finishing up tying. And then there she is all presented. And here she is. She comes home. And it's wonderful. But all this time, because there's been so little documentation done, and she's been gone for a while, we really haven't had any kind of penetrating study into her history, or things like that. So some of this information that I've talked about is brand new. I mean, no one's really looked into it until today. So, irony of ironies. All right, this is the placement list from 1930. And I've highlighted two very particular things. Because the doll sent to Eugene, Oregon was never Miss Fukuoka. It was always supposed to be Miss Kanagawa. So the records at the National Center in New York think that Kanagawa came here to Eugene, and Miss Fukuoka went to Albuquerque, New York. I mean, New Mexico. Yeah, of course, Albuquerque's, yeah. New Mexico. So we have a disconnect, which is, you know, not insurmountable, but it bears scrutiny. So, repeating a little bit of our process, we look at Miss Fukuoka, we'll call her Fukuoka, and the crest that goes along with her. and we look at her kimono crest, and we look at the dogu. So, I mean, everyone knows. They're going, uh-oh, here he goes again. He's going down this road. To dissect your doll, you have to sort of take a little trip around the world because she's connected to many, many, many other dolls across the country through stands, accessories, identities, and documents. And I won't do the whole thing, but a little bit. Fukuoka, she has her stand. It's a little bit of a mystery why the stand says Fukuoka when clearly you were supposed to get Miss Kanagawa based on the list. If you flip the stand upside down, which I don't recommend you do right now, but if you flip the stand upside down, there's also an artist label. And that artist label should match the label on the back of the doll. So here, the stand, we know that the doll, Miss Fukuoka, was originally made by Shokensai, not Koryusai, completely different artist. So already we know we have a match. So you have to say, well, Miss Fukuoka, do we have Miss Fukuoka? So this is an archival photograph of Miss Fukuoka before she left Japan. And we compare the two. Right, we're obviously not in the same ballpark. This doll, to me, looks a lot more like yours, and that's actually Miss Gunma. Right? So this doll is the original Miss Gunma, who was supposed to have been, and so we can do a comparison. You can see the design, all of that, and the crests are identical. So score, Gunma. Gunma was sent to the Brooklyn Museum of Art, in theory. So you go to Brooklyn, because you got to follow the trail, right? You follow the trail. You always follow the trail. You go to Brooklyn. Can I see your doll? Their doll's missing. Has been for a long time. But they do have these lovely accessories, right? So you compare the accessories, and you have a match. So that's good. We have Gunma, we have her accessories. But then you also have to ask, well, where did your doll go? You know, your Brooklyn Museum of Art. I mean, where did your doll go? Well, oh, and also, who did you have? If you didn't have, we have Gunma. Who did you have? So this is the original doll that they call Gunma that was on display when she arrived at the Brooklyn Museum in New York. And we find out that she's actually the original Miss Totori. Right? But you have to wonder, where is this doll? Well, this doll is actually living in Malaysia. I've gone on vacation. I do not know why. Evidently got out of control, left the collection, and is now in a private collection in Malaysia. I plan on bringing her home at some point. So this is, you know, there's like the artist formerly known as Prince, you know, kind of thing. So this is the doll formerly known as Miss Gunma, but it's actually Miss Totori on vacation in Malaysia. It's a long hyphenated name. So back, we're still looking for Fukuoka. We haven't found her yet. We found Totori, so we find a match in our doll archive, our photo archive. Beautiful Miss Fukuoka, cleverly disguised as Miss Hokkaido, living in Davenport, Iowa. Right? So there's your Miss Fukuoka, the original Miss Fukuoka. But that's her crest. So we still have this problem of this crest. So you dig, and you find out that there were actually, embarrassingly enough, there are several dolls with this crest, which gets a little complicated. We have this doll in Idaho, where she's currently known as Miss Wakayama, has the crest. If you also happen to go through Pear, South Dakota, you'll find this doll that also has the same crest, and she coincidentally is who? Miss Totori. So it gets, I know, it's fine. I'm almost done. But what you really need to do is go back to the archival photographs in Japan. This is Miss Kanagawa in her Sobetsukai, and the crests match. So we know that actually this is the doll that we're looking for. Backtrack. So our doll in Idaho is actually our original Miss Kanagawa. So in your doll here, you have a stand for one doll, accessories for another doll, and a doll of another doll. Right? So it's a multi-layered thing. So then you must ask, as I do, well, what went to New Mexico? Unfortunately, the doll in Mexico is missing. Has been for a very long time, went to the YWCA in there, was a very late placement in 1930. And so we really don't know who showed up there, but they think they got Miss Nagasaki. All right, so enough of that nonsense. It's nonsense, but it's not. I mean, in one level, these dolls had an original identity. They were clearly associated with a specific ken, specific children of that ken. But the mistake happened so early. For the last 84 years, this doll has been known as Miss Fukuoka. I don't think there's any reason to change it to Fukuoka Gunma Kanagawa-san. you know. I think it's just best we leave it as is, but with this understanding that for 84 years, this is how she's been, and so that bond is there. However, it does cause a few ripples when you take a doll back to Japan and they exhibit it, and they have the original photograph and the real doll, and people walk in and they go, something ain't right here, honey. But there is a lot of understanding and empathy and that kind of thing. So, but what is exciting is that there is movement. The movement is being reestablished where the dolls are serving their purpose. You're out here tonight. They're working. They're doing their thing. They're doing their job to convey these things. This was the exhibit that was at San Francisco Asian Art Museum with Miss Fukuoka and Miss Osaka Fu. This was an exhibit at Doshisha University in Kyoto that Anne Rose mentioned earlier with the discovered doll at auction, Miss Aomori and Miss Kyoto-shi having gone through intensive surgery. But, you know, I can get completely carried away with the intellectual aspect, the historical aspect, the digging, the treasure hunt aspect, but the motivating force was always to have these dolls resonate with children so a new generation will come along with understanding. So this is back at the Keimon-gakuen. So this is back in 1927 when the dolls first arrived in San Francisco with the Japanese-American students that were there at the school with some of the dolls behind. This is the Keimon-gakuen today, the kids of the Keimon-gakuen today who came down to the exhibition in San Francisco to see the dolls and sort of reconnect with that history. And it really, as an adult, we see a doll, and no matter how much we may understand, we still see it's a doll. Kids see it, and it lights up a different level. It lights up a different level of enthusiasm, and they may not understand all the history. They may not remember well, they probably don't remember the 1924 Immigration Act, but they can relate to the universality of the expression. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And what's going on today, it continues, and this is the last element here. This is Miss Chosun. And that's an interesting thing because Chosun was Miss Korea, a colony. Friendship dolls and colony. How are you going to sort of massage that element? And so she was at the Hartford, Connecticut, the Children's Museum there, and they were woefully unable to care for her. So now she's been transferred to Valparaiso University. And this is interesting because they're now starting a friendship institute there based on using her as an anchor point, but they're getting all the Gulick papers. Because the grandson of Gulick has continued this. He travels all around the world and is given dolls all the time. All of that material is going to Valparaiso, and that will become a center. But this question of, so how do you handle this? I mean, people who know Korean Japanese history, you know that this is sort of like not going to be overcome very easily. They have succeeded in involving the local Korean community in this in a positive way. They've given her a Korean outfit. Right? Temporarily. She won't be displayed like that permanently. But as a way to push past some of this stuff, to at least work with the Korean community there. I doubt we'll see Miss Chosun as a Japanese friendship doll touring Seoul anytime soon, you know, because I don't think that would do well. But I think that this idea that a doll has a power to push past a barrier, whether it be the bias and racism and all the elements that took place in America in the 1920s, or whether it be the issues that still circulate and percolate in our society today, whether it be a regional issue in Asia or whether it just be our own native inconsistencies and that type of thing. I think it's a very powerful message, and it gives me great hope for where these things are going. So that's where I stop for now, and I'm happy to answer any questions.